The air inside the Manhattan family court was sharp with tension, heavy with the scent of expensive cologne and broken vows. Rows of polished wooden benches were filled with curious strangers, lawyers whispering, and a few reporters scribbling notes, eager for the scandal of the day. At the center of it all sat Emma Carter, her swollen belly a visible reminder of a love story gone sour. She looked fragile in her simple navy dress, her hands folded tightly over her lap. She hadn't spoken a single word throughout the proceedings. Not once. Across from her, Andrew Carter lounged with arrogant ease, his expensive suit pressed to perfection, his gold watch catching the light every time he moved his hand. At his side sat Vanessa Brooks, the 26-year-old secretary who had slithered her way into Emma's marriage. Vanessa smirked, twirling a diamond bracelet Andrew had gifted her. She didn't bother to hide her triumph. The divorce papers lay on the judge's desk, ready to be signed. "You understand," the judge said firmly, looking at Emma, "that by agreeing to this settlement, you are walking away with nothing. No property, no spousal support, no share of his company, just the clothes you came in with." Emma nodded silently. Her heart pounded, but her face remained calm. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her mind. Every insult Andrew had thrown at her replayed like a cruel soundtrack. "You'll never survive without me. You're just a burden. You're nothing but a pregnant mistake." Each word had cut her deeper than any blade, and yet here she was, signing her freedom away. Andrew leaned toward Vanessa and whispered loudly enough for the courtroom to hear, "She'll be crawling back in less than a year. Watch." His laughter echoed, cruel and careless. The audience shifted uncomfortably, but Emma did not flinch. Her lawyer slid the papers toward her. With trembling fingers, Emma picked up the pen. The room seemed to hold its breath as she scribbled her name, sealing the end of her marriage. Andrew smirked, leaning back like a king who had just won another battle. Vanessa squeezed his arm, her eyes glittering with victory. They had no idea. No one in that courtroom had the faintest clue who Emma really was, or the storm she was about to unleash. As she rose to her feet, her silence felt less like defeat and more like the gathering calm before a hurricane. She glanced once at Andrew, her eyes unreadable, and walked out without a word. What Andrew didn't know was that the woman he discarded was not just his ex-wife. She was the sole heiress to a $300 million fortune, and her revenge was only beginning. Before the courtroom, before the silence, before the humiliation, Emma Carter was just a young woman in love. She had been 22 when she first met Andrew Carter at a charity fundraiser. He was tall, smooth-talking, and radiated ambition in a way that made her heart race. She remembered the way his eyes sparkled when he told stories of building his future empire. He wasn't rich then, not yet. He was a struggling entrepreneur trying to land investors, but he carried himself like a man destined for greatness. Emma, innocent and kind, believed in him with her whole heart. She had grown up in a quiet, modest suburb, the kind of girl who dreamed more of family dinners and laughter than power and fortune. When Andrew courted her, she felt like she had stepped into a fairy tale. Flowers delivered to her tiny apartment, long midnight walks through the city, whispered promises of forever. He told her he couldn't imagine a future without her. She wanted to believe it. Their wedding was small but beautiful. Emma wore a simple lace gown, her eyes glowing with joy as she repeated vows she thought would never be broken. Andrew held her hands so tightly she thought he meant every word. In sickness and in health, for richer or poorer. At that moment, she never doubted him. In the years that followed, Emma gave up everything to support Andrew's climb. She left her own career dreams behind, shelving plans to finish her graduate degree in art history. Instead, she worked part-time jobs to keep them afloat, while Andrew poured every ounce of energy into his startup. She clipped coupons, managed their tiny budget, and believed that one day his sacrifices and hers would pay off. When his company finally took off, Emma was there at every step. She ironed his shirts before investor meetings, stayed up late editing his presentations, and played the role of the devoted wife at business dinners. She wore second-hand dresses while he bought tailored suits, never once complaining. She thought they were a team. But slowly, things began to change. As Andrew's company grew, so did his ego. He started coming home later, brushing off her questions with vague answers about networking. He criticized her for not keeping up with his new social circle, for not looking glamorous enough beside him. Emma told herself it was just stress, that the man she married was still somewhere inside the polished stranger who barely looked at her anymore. Then came the pregnancy. Emma discovered she was carrying their first child, and for a moment she thought it would bring them back together. She imagined Andrew holding their baby, imagined their family dinners filled with warmth. But instead of joy, Andrew grew distant. He began to see her as a burden, someone who slowed him down. The man who once swore he would love her forever now barely glanced at her swollen belly. And then came Vanessa. Young, sleek, and ambitious. The very opposite of Emma, who had sacrificed her youth and career to stand by Andrew's side. At first, Emma dismissed the whispers, the late nights, the sudden bursts of perfume on his clothes. But when she saw Vanessa on his arm at a corporate gala, the truth was undeniable. Still, she stayed. She told herself love meant forgiveness, that once the baby came, Andrew would change. But the insults grew sharper, the distance wider, until the marriage was nothing but a hollow shell. The day she packed her things, she felt as if her entire world had collapsed. She thought she had lost everything: her marriage, her dignity, her dreams. She didn't know yet that what she carried inside her was not weakness, but the beginning of her greatest strength. Because Emma was not just a discarded wife, she was about to rise as a woman Andrew would never see coming. Pregnancy should have been a time of joy, of hope, of planning for a future filled with tiny footsteps and lullabies. For Emma Carter, it became a season of silent suffering. The small apartment that once felt like a nest of dreams now echoed with loneliness. Andrew rarely came home before midnight, and when he did, he smelled of expensive cologne and foreign perfume. Emma never asked anymore. The answers, when she dared, came with scorn. "Stop being so paranoid. Do you think I'd waste my time with someone else when I already have a wife at home?" His tone was sharp, his eyes cold. He didn't even bother to hide the contempt. She spent her days preparing for the baby alone. Stacks of baby books sat on the coffee table, dog-eared and marked with notes. She chose soft pastel blankets, tiny onesies, and lullabies she remembered from her own childhood. At night, she would sit by the window, one hand resting on her belly, whispering promises to the little life inside her. "You'll never feel unloved," she said softly, even as tears rolled down her cheeks. The cruelest moments came not from Andrew's words, but from his absence. Doctor's appointments passed with empty chairs beside her. Sonogram screens lit up with the first images of their child, and she smiled alone, clutching the printouts to her chest. When she showed them to Andrew later, he barely glanced at them before muttering, "That thing looks like a blob. I don't have time for this right now." The loneliness gnawed at her. Night stretched endlessly as she lay awake, fighting nausea, backaches, and the ache of rejection. She prayed for strength, but the silence was deafening. Her body grew heavier with each passing week, yet her heart felt hollow. And then came the humiliation. Andrew began taking Vanessa to public events. Photos appeared online, Andrew in sharp suits, Vanessa in glittering gowns, her hand looped possessively through his arm. The comments burned Emma's eyes. Finally upgraded. "She's perfect for him." His wife was holding him back. Emma sat in her tiny kitchen scrolling through the headlines, the glow of her phone the only light in the room. She bit her lip until it bled, refusing to cry loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Every insult, every whisper, every headline carved another wound into her soul. She felt like a ghost in her own life, invisible, erased by the man she had once given everything to. Yet, through the pain, her baby kicked. Gentle, insistent, reminding her that she wasn't truly alone. That small spark kept her from collapsing completely. One evening when Andrew stumbled home late, drunk and reeking of champagne, Emma tried one last time. "Don't you care?" she asked quietly, her hand resting on her belly. "Don't you care about us? About your child?" Andrew laughed bitterly, loosening his tie. You're nothing without me. And that baby? Just another responsibility I never asked for." Emma froze. The words sliced deeper than any blade. She realized then that the man she had loved no longer existed. The person standing before her was a stranger, one who would never see her worth. And so she swallowed her pain, her tears, and her anger. She stayed silent. But silence, she would soon learn, could be the most dangerous weapon of all. Because what Andrew didn't know was that the woman he dismissed as powerless was carrying not only his child, but a secret that would destroy his empire. The night of the Bright Futures Charity Gala was meant to be a celebration of hope. Crystal chandeliers bathed the ballroom in golden light, champagne glasses clinked, and the city's wealthiest mingled beneath velvet drapes and the haunting strains of a live orchestra. It was the kind of evening Emma Carter once dreamed of attending by her husband's side, smiling for the cameras, representing a love story built on success. Instead, she found herself standing alone near the back, clutching her small purse, praying no one would notice her trembling hands. Andrew had insisted she stay home. "These events aren't for women like you," he said coldly. But Emma, desperate for even the faintest glimpse of the life she had once been part of, showed up quietly. She wore a modest gown borrowed from a friend, her baby bump hidden beneath layers of fabric. She thought perhaps Andrew would at least acknowledge her presence, if only for appearances. The moment she entered the ballroom, however, reality crushed her. At the center of it all stood Andrew Carter, radiant in his tuxedo, a broad smile fixed across his face, and at his side was Vanessa Brooks, dripping in sequins, her beauty designed to catch every eye in the room. He introduced her with shameless pride. "This is Vanessa, the woman who truly understands me," he said to a cluster of investors. The words sliced through Emma like glass. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew Andrew was married. Everyone knew Emma. Yet here he was, flaunting his mistress as if Emma no longer existed. Camera flashes popped, capturing the scandal in real time. Emma could feel the eyes of strangers burning into her skin, their pity cutting deeper than their judgment. "Isn't that his wife?" someone murmured behind her. "Poor thing, look at her. She can barely stand." He traded up clearly. Emma's cheeks burned as she lowered her head, willing herself not to cry. Her heels felt like lead, her legs trembling under the weight of humiliation. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her pride rooted her in place. She would not give them the satisfaction of watching her flee. Andrew's laughter echoed across the hall as he toasted with Vanessa, his arm locked around her waist. "To a brighter future," he declared. The audience clapped politely, though many exchanged uneasy glances. Emma felt her stomach twist, her baby stirring as if sensing her pain. At that moment, she realized the man she once called her husband wasn't just unfaithful, he was cruel. He wanted her to see, to break, to disappear quietly into the shadows. She stood in the corner, holding back sobs, whispering to her unborn child, "We'll survive this. I promise you, we'll survive." The music swelled, the crowd laughed, and Emma slipped away before the tears could fall. She stepped into the cold night air, her heart shattered into pieces, her dignity scattered across the marble floor of the ballroom. But what Andrew didn't know, what none of them could possibly imagine, was that Emma's silence was not weakness. It was strategy. She was biding her time, holding back a truth so powerful it would one day turn this same ballroom into the stage of his downfall. Because soon, the world would discover that the woman Andrew mocked as powerless was, in fact, the hidden heiress to a $300 million fortune. The night after the gala, Emma Carter returned to the small apartment she had rented after Andrew forced her out of their home. Gone were the high ceilings, the marble floors, and the endless city views. Her new place was a cramped one-bedroom in a rundown building, the wallpaper peeling, the pipes groaning with every use. Yet it was the only roof she could afford. And for now, it was where she would carry the child that had become her only reason to keep breathing. She dropped her purse on the counter and collapsed onto the worn couch, the springs groaning beneath her weight. Her body ached from standing for hours in heels that pinched her swollen feet, but it was her heart that hurt the most. The memory of Andrew's smug smile, Vanessa's glittering gown, and the whispers of strangers replayed in her mind like a cruel film she could not shut off. Her hands moved instinctively to her belly. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted this for you. You deserve better than this." A small kick answered, and for a fleeting moment she felt comfort. But the truth remained. She was alone, with no money, no husband, and no plan for survival. She wandered into the tiny kitchen, opening cupboards that were nearly bare. A few cans of soup, some crackers, and a carton of milk that was close to expiring. Her prenatal vitamins sat on the counter, but she had started rationing them to make them last longer. She was terrified of what would happen if she couldn't afford her next prescription. The tears came then, uncontrollable and relentless. Emma sank to the floor, clutching her belly as sobs racked her body. She thought of her parents, gone too soon, unable to see the struggles their daughter now faced. She thought of the life she had given up, the education she never finished, the dreams she had buried to be Andrew's wife. And now, she was nothing more than a discarded woman, tossed aside like a broken toy. The walls seemed to close in on her. She wrapped herself in a blanket, rocking back and forth, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "I'll find a way. I'll protect you. Somehow." But even as she spoke the words, doubt gnawed at her. How could she protect her child when she couldn't even protect herself? The hours dragged on, the city outside alive with laughter and music, while Emma's apartment echoed with her cries. At one point, she stumbled to the bathroom, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. Her eyes were swollen, her cheeks streaked with tears. She barely recognized herself. "Who are you?" she whispered to the glass. She thought of Andrew's last words at the gala. "This is Vanessa, the woman who truly understands me." The cruelty of it burned in her chest. She wanted to scream, to break something, to make him feel even an ounce of the pain he had given her. Instead, she sank to her knees and prayed for strength, praying for a sign that her life wasn't destined to end in this cheap, forgotten place. And then, as dawn began to break and the first light spilled through her thin curtains, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Emma wiped her eyes and reached for it, expecting another cruel message from Andrew or an overdue bill. But when she saw the sender's name, her heart stopped, because the message wasn't from Andrew at all. It was from a lawyer connected to her late mother's estate, with words that would change everything. Emma's hands trembled as she stared at the glowing screen. The name was unmistakable: Harold Whitman, attorney at law. He had been her mother's most trusted confidant, a man who had attended her funeral years earlier and then disappeared quietly from her life. Emma hadn't spoken to him since. Why now? She unlocked the message, her breath shallow. "Emma, it is urgent that we meet. Your mother left instructions for me to contact you once certain conditions were met. Call me as soon as possible." For a moment, Emma thought it must be a mistake. Her mother had passed away when Emma was only 22. What conditions could possibly matter now? She sank onto the couch, her mind spinning. After everything, the divorce, the humiliation, the loneliness, why was this message arriving now? Clutching her phone, Emma dialed the number with shaking fingers. It rang only once before a warm but firm voice answered. "Emma, I was hoping you'd call. We need to meet. Today." Hours later, she found herself stepping into an oak-paneled office on the Upper East Side. The room smelled of leather and polished wood, the walls lined with books that seemed older than the city itself. Behind a massive desk sat Harold Whitman, his silver hair neatly combed, his eyes kind but sharp. "You look so much like your mother," he said softly, motioning for her to sit. "Margaret would be proud of you." The mention of her mother's name sent a pang through Emma's chest. "Why are you contacting me now? What conditions?" she asked. Harold leaned forward, sliding a folder across the desk. "Your mother wanted you to live a normal life, away from the spotlight, until you reached 29, or until you married. She believed you deserved the chance to choose who you were without the burden of wealth." Emma frowned, confused. "Burden of wealth?" Harold opened the folder. Inside were documents, stamped and notarized, numbers that made Emma's head spin. "Your mother was the sole heir to the Vanderbilt Carter fortune. When she passed, everything transferred to you. Stocks, real estate, trusts. As of today, Emma, your net worth exceeds $300 million. Emma's mouth went dry. She shook her head as if the words were a cruel trick. "That's impossible. I've been living in a one-bedroom apartment. I can barely afford food." Harold's expression was gentle. "That was your choice. You chose love. You hid your true name and fortune when you married Andrew. You wanted to be valued for yourself, not for money. But Andrew, he never knew who you really were." Emma's mind reeled. Every insult Andrew had hurled, every cruel laugh, every moment he paraded Vanessa before the world, it all burned with new meaning. He thought she was powerless. He thought she was broken. All the while, she had more power than he could ever dream of. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow this time, but of something sharper, fiercer. She looked at Harold. "Why tell me this now?" "Because, Emma," Harold said, his voice steady, "your silence has protected you long enough. Now it's time to decide how you want to use the truth." Emma sat back, her heart pounding. The weight of her hidden inheritance pressed down on her like a crown she had never asked for. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, a spark she hadn't felt in years, strength. And as she left Harold's office, one thought consumed her. Andrew Carter had no idea the woman he mocked as worthless was the heiress who could ruin him with a single signature. Emma couldn't shake the conversation with Harold Whitman. For years, she had believed she was just another ordinary woman, born to a modest mother who wanted nothing more than a quiet life. But Harold's words replayed in her mind. "You are the sole heir to the Vanderbilt Carter fortune." The following week, Harold invited her back to his office to reveal more. She sat across from him, a steaming cup of tea between them, her hands clasped tightly as if she were holding herself together. "Emma," Harold began, sliding a leather-bound folder across the desk, "you deserve to know where you came from. Your mother, Margaret Carter, wasn't just a kind woman who raised you with love. She was the daughter of the Vanderbilt dynasty, one of the oldest, wealthiest families in America." Emma blinked, her throat dry. "The Vanderbilts? As in railroads, steel, old money?" Harold nodded. "Yes, but Margaret wanted nothing to do with the suffocating world she was born into. Your grandfather ran the empire like a general, cold, strategic, ruthless. Your mother fell in love with your father, a man far removed from that glittering cage. She wanted a normal life, one filled with love, not power. That's why she kept you away from the family name. She wanted you to be free from the weight of legacy." Emma's mind spun. Images of her childhood flashed before her. Her mother clipping coupons, working long hours, teaching Emma the value of kindness over wealth. She had thought their modest life was all they could afford, but in reality, it had been a choice. "She hid me," Emma whispered, more to herself than to Harold. Harold leaned forward, his eyes soft. "She protected you. Margaret believed that wealth corrupts, that it attracts people who see dollar signs instead of hearts. She wanted you to marry for love. That's why she kept your inheritance locked until you were old enough to understand the responsibility, or until life forced the truth upon you." Emma thought of Andrew then. The way he had once held her hand, whispered promises of forever, and then thrown her aside the moment he felt she was no longer useful. He had loved her only as long as she served his ambitions. The bitter irony was that she could have bankrolled every dream he had ever boasted about. "Did Andrew know anything?" Emma asked quietly. "No," Harold said firmly. "Your mother swore me to secrecy. He believed you were just an ordinary girl, and he treated you accordingly. Perhaps that's the most telling truth of all." Emma sat in silence, her chest tightening. The betrayal cut deeper now. Andrew hadn't just betrayed his wife, he had betrayed the very woman who could have been his greatest ally. And now his arrogance would be his undoing. Harold placed a final envelope on the desk. "This contains access to your trust, properties, accounts, investments, all legally yours. But Emma, with wealth comes power, and with power comes responsibility. You must decide, will you remain silent, or will you reveal who you truly are?" Emma's fingers brushed over the envelope. The weight of it was almost unbearable, as if it contained not just money but destiny itself. She thought of her unborn child, the future she wanted to give them. A life filled with dignity instead of humiliation. For the first time since her marriage crumbled, Emma felt something new. Not despair, not grief, resolve. She stood, tucking the envelope into her purse. "I've been silent long enough," she said, her voice steady. And as she walked out of Harold's office, she knew the next time Andrew saw her, he wouldn't be facing the broken wife he left behind. He'd be facing the heiress who could destroy everything he had built. In the weeks after the divorce was finalized, Andrew Carter carried himself like a king who had conquered his last enemy. At every business luncheon, every cocktail party, every gala, he paraded Vanessa on his arm like a trophy. His friends, investors, and colleagues clapped him on the back, congratulating him on his upgrade. Andrew accepted the praise with a smirk. sipping champagne as if the entire world was his to command. At a rooftop bar overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline, Andrew leaned against the railing, laughing with a group of old college buddies. Vanessa sat nearby, her manicured hand resting on his thigh, her laughter chiming like glass as she soaked in the attention. "Honestly," Andrew said, raising his glass, "Emma never stood a chance in my world. Sweet girl, sure. But she was ordinary. She couldn't keep up. Vanessa, now, she's the kind of woman who knows how to play the game." One of his friends chuckled. "Wasn't Emma pregnant when you left her?" Andrew waved his hand dismissively. "She'll be fine. Women like her always come crawling back when reality hits. Trust me, within a year she'll be begging for help, and when she does, maybe I'll toss her a check or two. For the baby." His smirk widened. "But not before she learns the hard way what it's like to lose me." The group erupted in laughter, raising their glasses to toast his cruelty. Vanessa leaned closer, whispering in his ear, "You're too generous. She doesn't deserve even that much." Emma's name had become a punchline in Andrew's world. To him, she was nothing more than a forgotten chapter, a weak woman destined to fade into obscurity while he and Vanessa basked in luxury. He relished in the whispers of gossip magazines, which painted him as a bold man who had traded a tired marriage for a glamorous new future. What Andrew didn't realize was that Emma's silence was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a storm gathering strength. Meanwhile, Emma was transforming quietly. She met with Harold Whitman regularly, learning about her assets, her trusts, her properties. She began to understand the scope of her power, not just in numbers, but in influence. Her wardrobe shifted from borrowed dresses to elegant, tailored pieces. Her posture straightened. The sadness in her eyes gave way to steel. But Andrew was blind to all of it. He was too busy bragging to notice the headlines that hinted at her reemergence, too arrogant to consider that the woman he had humiliated might be rising from the ashes. At one particularly exclusive gala, Andrew gave a speech about perseverance and ambition, preaching to the crowd about how he had built his empire from nothing. "I know what it takes to succeed," he boasted. "I left behind what didn't serve me, and I embraced what made me stronger. That's why Vanessa and I are unstoppable." The applause filled the room, but whispers followed. Some guests exchanged uneasy glances, questioning his shamelessness. Others quietly remarked that Emma had been the one supporting him in the early years. But Andrew didn't care. In his mind, Emma was irrelevant, powerless, forgotten. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that Emma was no longer the woman he had discarded. She was preparing for a return so devastating it would strip him of his pride, his power, and his empire. And the first sign of that reckoning was already on its way to his office. An envelope with Emma's name on it, carrying the kind of truth that could ruin him forever. The city outside Emma's apartment hummed with life. Cars honking, neon signs flashing, laughter spilling from late-night bars. But inside, silence reigned. The only sound was the steady rhythm of her unborn child's heartbeat, echoing through the fetal monitor at her bedside. Every time Emma heard that sound, a rush of fierce determination surged through her. She sat on the edge of her bed, her hands resting gently on her swollen belly. "It's just you and me now," she whispered. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with a rising strength she hadn't felt in months. "But I promise, little one, you will never know the shame I have endured. You will never feel the sting of rejection. You will be loved, protected, and respected, no matter what it takes." Tears filled her eyes as she remembered Andrew's cruel words. "That baby is just another responsibility I never asked for." She clenched her fists. How dare he dismiss the life growing inside her? This child wasn't a burden. It was her reason to rise again. Emma pulled out a small wooden box her mother had given her before she died. Inside were keepsakes, an old locket, a faded letter, a family crest pin she had never understood until Harold explained her heritage. She traced her fingers over the crest, whispering, "You come from strength, from resilience, from power, and I will make sure you inherit not only that legacy, but also the love I was denied." She began making lists late into the night, plans for the nursery, names she might give her child, schools she wanted to visit once the baby was older. But alongside the tender dreams, another list formed in her mind. Strategies. She mapped out how to use her inheritance, who to align with, and how to dismantle Andrew's arrogance brick by brick. Her child would not be born into weakness. They would enter a world where their mother stood tall, no longer a victim, but a warrior. There were nights when fear clawed at her, nights when the loneliness pressed so heavily that she thought she might break. She would hold her belly and cry softly, confessing her worries to the child who couldn't yet understand. But each kick reminded her she wasn't alone. Each flutter was a message. Keep going, Mama. Don't give up. One evening after a particularly exhausting day, Emma stood by her window overlooking the city skyline. She placed both hands on her belly and spoke aloud as if declaring an oath. You will never have to beg for love. You will never wonder if you're enough. I swear to you, I will build us a future where no one can touch us. Not Andrew, not Vanessa. No one. In that moment, Emma's tears dried. She no longer saw herself as a discarded wife or a pitiful ex. She was a mother, a protector. And soon she would be a force powerful enough to rewrite the narrative Andrew had created. She pressed a kiss to the palm of her hand and laid it gently on her stomach. I won't just survive for you, she whispered. I'll win. And the very next day, an unexpected ally would arrive at her door. Someone who would give her the tools to turn that vow into a plan for revenge. The knock on Emma's apartment door came just after sunrise. She hesitated, tightening her robe around her body, her heart quickening with unease. Few people knew where she lived, and even fewer bothered to visit. When she opened the door, she was met with a tall, broad-shouldered man in a tailored charcoal suit. His presence filled the narrow hallway with quiet authority. Emma Carter? He asked, his deep voice steady but gentle. She nodded warily. Yes, he extended a hand. Ethan Blackwell, I was a friend of your father's and a business partner to your late mother. Harold Whitman asked me to reach out. Emma blinked. The name stirred something faint in her memory. Her father had once spoken of Ethan Blackwell, a rising lawyer who had turned into a formidable CEO. Now, standing before her, he looked every bit the man who had built an empire, confident, disciplined, yet not unkind. She stepped aside, allowing him into her modest apartment. The contrast was stark, his polished presence against her worn furniture and peeling wallpaper. Still, he sat without judgment, placing a leather briefcase on the coffee table. Emma, he began, his gaze direct, Harold told me you've learned the truth, about your inheritance, about your family, and about Andrew. Emma lowered herself into the armchair across from him, her hands protectively covering her belly. Yes, I know now, but I don't know what to do with it. I don't want to just be rich. I want justice. Ethan's lips curved into the faintest smile. Then you've come to the right man. He opened the briefcase, spreading documents across the table. Andrew Carter believes you're powerless. He parades his mistress. He mocks your name. He underestimates you. That arrogance is his weakness, and we're going to use it. Emma leaned forward, her pulse racing. How? Ethan tapped the first document. For starters, you have controlling shares in 3 companies Andrew's firm relies on. You could crush his cash flow tomorrow if you wished, but revenge is best served strategically, not rashly. What you need is a public reckoning, one that restores your dignity while stripping his. Emma stared at him astonished. You're saying I can ruin him? I'm saying, Ethan replied firmly, that you can decide the terms of your own story. You've been silent long enough. It's time to step into the light. The weight of his words settled over her. For the first time, Emma felt she wasn't alone in this fight. She had an ally, someone who not only believed in her, but had the power and knowledge to guide her. As they spent hours poring over documents and strategies, Ethan's steady presence gave Emma strength. He wasn't just a lawyer or a CEO. He was a man who understood betrayal, who had once been burned by those he trusted most. That shared pain created an unspoken bond between them. By the time the afternoon sun spilled into the apartment, Emma felt a shift within her. She was no longer the broken ex-wife Andrew mocked. She was an heiress, a strategist, a mother preparing to protect her child's future. And now, with Ethan at her side, she had the means to strike back. But Ethan had one condition, a secret he hadn't yet revealed, one that could change not only Emma's plan for revenge, but also the future she thought she was building. The days following Ethan Blackwell's visit became a whirlwind of change. Emma no longer drifted through her life like a ghost. Instead, she woke each morning with a sense of purpose burning inside her. The silence that had once suffocated her now became a cloak, a weapon she wielded as she carefully built her return. The first transformation was physical. With Ethan's guidance, Emma hired a discreet stylist, an older woman named Claudette, who had once dressed Manhattan's most powerful socialites. When she entered Emma's apartment for the first fitting, she didn't see a discarded wife in a borrowed dress. She saw potential. "You have presence," Claudette said firmly, circling her with a measuring tape. "You don't need to shout for attention. You simply need to stand in the room and let them see you." Within weeks, Emma's wardrobe shifted from faded cardigans and discount store blouses to tailored gowns, elegant coats, and shoes that carried her with confidence. She learned how to walk again, not timidly, but with her head high, her steps deliberate, her hand resting with pride on her growing belly. The second transformation was financial. With Harold and Ethan's help, Emma began reviewing her accounts. She toured properties she hadn't even known she owned, luxurious penthouses, sprawling estates, and a historic townhouse in Manhattan that once belonged to her grandmother. Each property was a reminder of the legacy she carried, but also a tool. Ethan explained how she could leverage these assets to gain influence in the very circles Andrew craved. "You don't need to destroy him outright," Ethan reminded her. "You need to show the world who you are. Once they see, Andrew will destroy himself." Emma nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then let's make sure the world is watching." The third transformation was internal. Emma began therapy sessions arranged by Ethan, sessions that forced her to confront her pain instead of burying it. She spoke of Andrew's cruelty, of Vanessa's smirks, of the long nights she had spent whispering promises to her unborn child. Each confession was a step out of the shadows. By the end of each session, she felt lighter, sharper, more focused. At night, she worked on speeches, coached by Ethan himself. "Look them in the eye," he instructed. "Don't flinch. Don't apologize. You are not broken, Emma. You are inevitable." One evening, as Emma stood before a mirror in her new townhouse, draped in a simple black gown Claudette had chosen, she barely recognized herself. The tired, tear-streaked woman who had once crouched on the floor of a tiny apartment was gone. In her place stood a woman with fire in her eyes, shoulders squared, chin raised. She was no longer waiting for Andrew's approval. She was preparing to show the world she had never needed it. And yet, beneath all the transformation, Emma held on to her most sacred vow. Her child. Every decision, every plan, every stitch of clothing was not just for revenge, it was for the life growing inside her. As she placed her hand on her belly, her phone buzzed. A notification lit the screen. Annual Winter Gala, guest list confirmed. Emma's name was printed among New York's elite, courtesy of Ethan's connections. And when Emma saw Andrew and Vanessa's names listed too, she knew the night of her return was set. The night she would step into the spotlight and make them regret ever underestimating her. Andrew Carter had always loved the spotlight, but after the divorce, he practically lived in it. To him, scandal wasn't shame, it was publicity. The tabloids covered his every move, splashing photos of him and Vanessa Brooks across glossy pages. On yachts in the Hamptons, front row at Fashion Week, sipping champagne at rooftop clubs. He called it rebranding. His friends called it upgrading, and Vanessa called it destiny. One crisp evening, Andrew and Vanessa hosted a private dinner at one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. The guest list read like a who's who of finance, real estate, and politics. Crystal glasses sparkled under golden chandeliers, and laughter spilled from the long mahogany table. Vanessa, dressed in a crimson gown that clung to her like a second skin, leaned toward the women beside her, flashing the diamond bracelet Andrew had gifted her just the week before. "Andrew has such vision," she cooed, her voice dripping with pride. "He knows how to make tough choices. Some people weren't meant to stand beside him." The women exchanged knowing glances, their smiles polite but sharp. Everyone in the room knew she meant Emma. At the other end of the table, Andrew raised his glass. "To the future," he declared, his voice booming. "Vanessa and I are building something extraordinary together." Emma was, well, she wasn't cut out for this world. But Vanessa understands me. Applause rang out, though some clapped slower than others. A few guests whispered quietly, recalling Emma's quiet dignity at past events, how she had once been the woman smoothing Andrew's rough edges. But Andrew didn't notice, or perhaps he didn't care. His ego was too inflated, too drunk on power and champagne to sense the unease in the room. Later that evening, after most guests had gone, Andrew and Vanessa sat together in the back of a sleek black limousine. Vanessa nestled against him, scrolling through photos of the night already posted online. "We look incredible," she said with a smug smile. "Everyone knows now that you've moved on. Emma must be so embarrassed, watching from her little apartment." Andrew chuckled, tugging Vanessa closer. "She'll be back. Women like her can't survive without men like me. She'll beg, and when she does, I'll remind her of what she lost." Vanessa tilted her head, studying him. "And what if she doesn't? What if she actually stays gone?" Andrew smirked, his reflection gleaming in the tinted glass. "Then she'll fade into nothing, and no one will remember her name." But Andrew was wrong. Far from fading, Emma was preparing. While he toasted to his arrogance, she was quietly gathering her strength, her allies, and her fortune. The empire he thought he had built on the ruins of her heart was nothing more than a fragile house of cards. For now, Andrew basked in the illusion of victory. Vanessa curled against him like a prize he had earned. He believed the future was his. He believed the past was dead. He believed Emma Carter was finished. But fate was already writing a different story. One that would put Emma back in the spotlight and leave Andrew gasping as the world chose her over him. The marble steps of the New York Supreme Court gleamed under the morning sun as Emma Carter arrived, her posture straight, her gown tailored to perfection, and her chin lifted high. Gone was the timid woman who once shuffled into court to sign away her marriage in silence. Today, she was different. Today, she was armed. Andrew Carter had no idea. He strutted into the courthouse with Vanessa on his arm, his designer suit catching the light, his smirk as wide as ever. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and Andrew soaked in the attention like it was oxygen. Vanessa clung to him, basking in her role as the new Mrs. Carter-to-be. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Lawyers shuffled papers, journalists whispered, and even the judge looked weary of yet another round of Carter drama. Andrew settled into his seat with arrogance dripping from every movement, his gaze flicking dismissively toward Emma. "Nice dress," he said under his breath, a sneer tugging at his lips. "Did you rent it?" Emma didn't reply. Instead, she calmly opened a leather folder and placed a single document on the table in front of her. Ethan Blackwell, seated beside her, gave her the faintest nod of encouragement. The proceedings began as expected. Andrew's lawyer launched into a rehearsed speech about Andrew's empire, his success, and how Emma had contributed nothing of value. "My client has been more than generous," the lawyer declared. "Mrs. Carter has already been compensated beyond what she deserves." Andrew leaned back, smirking at the judge as if the outcome were already written. But then Emma rose slowly, her voice calm but resonant. "Your Honor," she began, "there is new information relevant to these proceedings." The courtroom stilled. Emma handed the judge the document she had brought. The judge adjusted her glasses, scanning the pages. Silence stretched, thick and heavy, until the judge's brows furrowed. "This," the judge said, her voice sharp, "this indicates that Mrs. Carter is the majority shareholder of 3 companies directly tied to Mr. Carter's firm. Is this accurate?" Andrew's head snapped toward Emma, his smirk vanishing. "What?" he barked. "That's impossible. She doesn't own anything." Emma's eyes locked on his, steady and unflinching. "It's entirely possible, Andrew. In fact, it's reality. I am the heiress to the Vanderbilt Carter estate, and as of now, I hold controlling interest in the very companies that prop up your empire." Gasps erupted across the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, and Vanessa's face drained of color. Andrew shot to his feet, his voice rising in anger. "You're lying. This is some trick." The judge slammed her gavel. "Order in the court." But Emma remained poised, her hand resting on the folder of evidence. "No trick, Andrew. Just the truth you never bothered to see. While you paraded your mistress and mocked me, I was preparing. And today, I take back not only my dignity, but also my power." Andrew's lawyer scrambled, flipping through his files, but it was useless. The documents were ironclad, signed and notarized years ago. The look on Andrew's face was a mixture of shock, rage, and disbelief. For the first time, the man who thought he was untouchable felt the ground shift beneath him. And Emma wasn't finished. Because what she revealed in court was only the beginning of a plan that would strip Andrew of everything he thought he owned. The morning after Emma's courtroom revelation, the headlines spread like wildfire. Every major newspaper, magazine, and gossip column carried her name in bold letters. Silent ex-wife revealed as $300 million heiress. Andrew Carter's empire built on lies, ex-wife holds the keys. From humiliated to powerful, Emma Carter's stunning comeback. Emma woke up to her phone buzzing endlessly, flooded with calls, texts, and emails. Former acquaintances who had once ignored her now wanted meetings. Journalists requested interviews, charities asked her to host events, and designers offered gowns. The world had shifted overnight. Emma was no longer the discarded wife, but the heiress everyone wanted to know. Meanwhile, Andrew Carter faced the opposite fate. Paparazzi hounded him outside his penthouse, shouting questions he couldn't answer. Andrew, did you know your wife was an heiress? How does it feel to lose control of your companies? Did you really say she was worthless? Clips of his arrogance replayed online, him laughing with Vanessa, dismissing Emma as ordinary, boasting that she would beg to come back. But now those clips were paired with Emma's poised courtroom statement. The internet was merciless. Memes flooded social media. Andrew in a crown made of paper, Andrew labeled King of Arrogance. Andrew with captions like, "She was the empire, you were just the employee." Vanessa fared no better. Once photographed as the glamorous new partner, she was now mocked as the mistress, left holding nothing. Her social media accounts were bombarded with thousands of comments calling her a homewrecker, a gold digger, and worse. Inside their penthouse, Andrew raged. He smashed a glass against the wall, shouting at Vanessa, "How could she do this to me? How could she hide this?" Vanessa, her face pale, snapped back. "Maybe if you hadn't humiliated her, she wouldn't have destroyed you." Their shouting match was caught by paparazzi stationed outside, and within hours, clips of their fight went viral. The world laughed while Andrew's carefully crafted image crumbled. Investors began pulling out of deals. His company's stock took a nosedive. The empire he thought untouchable was unraveling before his eyes. And Emma? She remained calm, choosing silence once again. But this time, it was the silence of dignity. She declined interviews, issuing only a brief statement. "My focus is on my child and my future. I wish no ill will, but I will no longer be silent about who I am." That simple statement lit a fire in the public's imagination. She became a symbol of resilience, of strength, of a woman who endured betrayal and humiliation, yet rose higher than anyone expected. Talk shows praised her composure. Women across the country shared her story with hashtags like Silent No More and Emma Rises. Ethan watched it all unfold beside her, quietly proud. "You've done it," he told her one evening. "The world sees you now, not as Andrew's ex-wife, but as Emma Carter, the woman who refused to be broken." Emma touched her belly, her lips curving into a small, determined smile. "This is only the beginning," she whispered. And as the invitations began pouring in for the winter gala, Emma knew it would be the stage where she delivered her most unforgettable strike yet. The winter gala was the crown jewel of New York's social calendar. Politicians, CEOs, and celebrities filled the glittering ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria, where golden chandeliers rained light across a sea of tuxedos and couture gowns. For years, Emma Carter had attended on Andrew's arm, standing in his shadow, her presence quiet, her voice muted. Tonight, everything was different. Whispers rippled through the room long before she even entered. Reporters and socialites buzzed about the woman who had shaken Wall Street to its core. "She's coming," someone whispered. "Emma Carter, the heiress." The double doors opened, and all heads turned. Emma stepped into the ballroom in a midnight blue gown that shimmered under the lights, its silhouette hugging her figure with elegance while proudly showcasing her baby bump. Diamonds sparkled at her neck, heirlooms from her family's collection, and her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. On her arm stood Ethan Blackwell, composed and commanding, his presence only amplifying hers. For a moment, the entire room seemed to pause. The orchestra faltered, conversations stilled, and all eyes locked on Emma. The woman who had once been mocked as fragile, invisible, forgotten, now radiated strength. She didn't need to speak. Her very presence was a declaration. Across the room, Andrew froze mid-conversation. His glass of champagne trembled in his hand as his eyes widened. Vanessa, dressed in a glittering silver gown, stiffened beside him, her lips parting in shock. The smug confidence they had carried into the evening drained in an instant. "She looks incredible," one guest whispered. "Better than ever," another replied. "She's not here to hide," a third murmured. "She's here to conquer." Emma glided across the ballroom, each step measured, her gaze unwavering. She and Ethan moved like royalty, commanding the room without needing to demand it. Conversations resumed, but this time they centered around her. Investors whispered eagerly about partnerships, society ladies praised her elegance, and reporters scribbled furiously, capturing every detail of her triumphant return. When Emma finally reached Andrew and Vanessa, she didn't falter. She looked Andrew straight in the eye, her expression serene. "Andrew," she said smoothly, her voice carrying just enough to be overheard by those nearest. "Vanessa." She gave a polite nod, as though greeting distant acquaintances, not people who had once shattered her life. Andrew stammered, his confidence cracking. "Emma, I didn't expect." "You never did," Emma interrupted gently, her smile calm but cutting. "That was always your mistake." Vanessa shifted uncomfortably, her usual smirk absent. For the first time she looked small, insignificant under the weight of Emma's presence. The orchestra struck up a new melody, and Ethan extended his hand. "Shall we?" he asked. Emma placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor. The crowd parted for them, and soon all eyes were watching as they moved together with effortless grace. Cameras flashed, capturing the image that would dominate headlines the next morning. Emma Carter, glowing, powerful, untouchable. Andrew stood frozen, Vanessa clinging desperately to his arm, while whispers around them grew louder. The tide had turned. He was no longer the star of the story, Emma was. And as the final note of the orchestra swelled, an unexpected announcement crackled over the microphone. One that would expose a devastating secret Andrew had fought to keep buried. The room hushed as the microphone crackled. All eyes turned toward the stage, where the host of the Winter Gala, a respected philanthropist, smiled warmly at the crowd. "Tonight, before we continue our celebration, we have a very special announcement," he said. "We're proud to honor Emma Carter, not only for her generosity, but for her extraordinary resilience. Her contributions to our charities this year have already changed countless lives." The applause that followed was thunderous. Cameras flashed as Emma, radiant in her midnight blue gown, nodded gracefully. The recognition wasn't just applause, it was vindication. The woman Andrew had once humiliated in public was now being celebrated on the city's grandest stage. Andrew's face twisted, his jaw clenched so tight that a vein bulged at his temple. Vanessa, sensing the shift in the room, tugged at his arm. "Smile," she hissed under her breath. "People are watching." But Andrew couldn't. Every cheer for Emma was a dagger in his pride. And worse, as the applause grew, Vanessa felt the foundation of her own role begin to crumble. For months, she had basked in Andrew's power, believing she had secured her place as his future wife. But tonight, surrounded by whispers and stares, she realized something terrifying. Andrew wasn't the powerful man she thought he was. Without Emma's silence, his empire was collapsing. Guests began approaching Emma, offering their congratulations and business cards. A senator shook her hand. A hedge fund manager leaned in to whisper about partnerships. A luxury brand executive promised to send over gowns from their next collection. Emma handled it all with grace, her smile calm, her eyes glowing with quiet strength. Meanwhile, Vanessa sat at the edge of the dance floor, suddenly invisible. Her crimson lipstick no longer drew attention, her glittering gown no longer dazzled. Everyone wanted Emma. No one wanted Andrew's mistress. As the night wore on, Vanessa watched Andrew drown himself in whiskey, his charm faltering, his laughter forced. She realized with a sinking feeling that she had tethered herself to a sinking ship. And Emma, the woman she once mocked, was the rising star of the evening. Later, as they rode home in Andrew's limousine, the tension was unbearable. Andrew fumed, his fists clenched, muttering curses under his breath. Vanessa finally snapped. "This isn't what I signed up for," she spat, her voice sharp. "You told me she was weak. You told me she was nothing. But she's stronger than you, Andrew. The whole city sees it." Andrew glared at her, his face red with fury. "Don't you dare compare me to her. She's nothing but..." No. Vanessa cut him off, her tone icy. She's everything you're not, and if you think I'm going to go down with you, you're wrong. Andrew's eyes darkened. You wouldn't dare leave me. But Vanessa didn't answer. She turned to the window, her reflection staring back at her, lips pressed into a thin line. The realization had struck her like lightning. Her best chance of survival wasn't clinging to Andrew, it was abandoning him. And what Andrew didn't know was that Vanessa had already made her first move. She had contacted someone who could expose his darkest secret. The cracks in Andrew Carter's empire appeared slowly at first. Subtle dips in stock value, nervous calls from investors, rumors whispered at exclusive luncheons. But within weeks of the Winter Gala, those cracks widened into gaping chasms. It began with a leaked document. Financial records showing irregularities in Andrew's company accounts surfaced online, raising questions about misused funds, shady partnerships, and debts hidden behind shell corporations. At first, Andrew dismissed it as slander. Competitors are jealous, he barked during a board meeting. They can't stand that I'm winning. But the evidence grew too loud to ignore. Major news outlets picked up the story. Anchors on primetime television dissected his business practices, their voices heavy with suspicion. Headlined, Andrew Carter's fortune built on fraud? Stocks plunge as allegations against Carter Holdings mount. The king of arrogance facing his reckoning. Investors began to panic. Phone calls flooded Andrew's office, demanding answers. His board members, once loyal, turned cold. We need transparency, one of them said sharply during a tense meeting. If these allegations are true, you've put us all at risk. Andrew slammed his fist on the table. It's lies. All of it. Do you think Emma doesn't have something to do with this? But even as he spat her name like venom, a gnawing fear crept into his chest. Because deep down, Andrew knew the truth. He had cut corners, made dirty deals, and hidden debts. He had believed himself untouchable. Now his sins were crawling out of the shadows. Meanwhile, Vanessa was slipping further away. She avoided his calls, skipped events, and when she did appear at his side, her smile was strained, her eyes cold. She had begun whispering to people in hushed corners of restaurants, feeding journalists little morsels of truth in exchange for her own safety. Emma, however, remained silent. She didn't need to lift a finger. She simply watched from a distance as Andrew's empire crumbled under the weight of his arrogance and deceit. With Ethan guiding her, she positioned herself as the dignified heiress who had risen above scandal, never once mentioning Andrew's name. Her silence was louder than any accusation. By spring, Andrew's company was in freefall. Stocks had dropped nearly 50%. Lawsuits loomed. Government regulators launched investigations. The once celebrated CEO who had bragged about being unstoppable now found himself cornered, his reputation shredded. In one particularly brutal moment, Andrew walked into his office only to find his employees staring at him in silence, their eyes filled with contempt. A young assistant whispered to another, he thought he could bury her. Now she's burying him. The words cut deeper than he admitted. That night, alone in his penthouse, Andrew poured himself drink after drink, his reflection in the glass wall distorted and broken. He thought of Emma, how she had looked at the gala, glowing, untouchable, powerful. And he realized with a sickening twist in his gut that she hadn't even needed to fight him directly. She had let the truth do it for her. But Andrew wasn't ready to surrender. He wasn't built to lose. As he stared into the night, his jaw tightened, his fists clenched. If she wants war, he muttered, then I'll give her war. And the next morning, Andrew launched a desperate plan, one that would put Emma and her unborn child directly in danger. The morning Andrew Carter decided to fight back, a storm was already brewing inside him. His empire was collapsing, his investors abandoning him, and Vanessa, once his prized possession, was slipping through his fingers. But Andrew was a man who thrived on control, and he refused to let Emma's silence and newfound power be the final word. He picked up his phone and made a call to a man he hadn't spoken to in years. I need a problem handled, Andrew said coldly. Her name is Emma Carter. Within hours, strange things began happening in Emma's life. Her car, parked outside her townhouse, was vandalized, tires slashed, windows shattered. Anonymous phone calls rang through the night, filled with silence or distorted breathing. One evening, as Emma returned home, she felt a presence behind her, the echo of footsteps that disappeared the moment she turned. Ethan was the first to notice the pattern. He confronted her in her townhouse, his voice tense. "This isn't random, Emma. This is Andrew. He's panicking. He's dangerous now." Emma placed a trembling hand on her belly, her other hand gripping the back of a chair for balance. "He wouldn't hurt me," she whispered, though even she didn't believe her own words. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Don't underestimate a desperate man. He's lost everything. His money, his reputation, his power. When men like Andrew are cornered, they lash out." For the first time since her transformation began, fear crept back into Emma's heart. She had rebuilt herself. She had risen higher than she ever imagined, but Andrew's shadow still loomed. The thought of him harming her child made her blood run cold. That night, as she lay in bed, she whispered to the life growing inside her. "I promised I'd protect you. I won't let him take that from me." But her voice cracked, betraying the terror clawing at her chest. The next day, the danger escalated. Emma returned from a meeting to find her front door ajar. She froze, her breath shallow, her heart pounding in her ears. Slowly, she stepped inside. The living room lights were off, the silence deafening. A vase lay shattered on the floor. "Hello?" she called, her voice shaking. No answer. She reached for her phone, but before she could dial, a figure stepped out of the shadows. For a split second, her heart nearly gave out, until she saw Ethan. His face was grim, his eyes scanning the room. "I came early," he explained, holding up a spare key Harold had given him. "Someone's been here, Emma. You're not safe." Her knees buckled, and Ethan caught her just before she fell. "He's trying to scare you into silence," Ethan said firmly. "But you're stronger than that, and I won't let him touch you." Emma clung to him, fear mixing with gratitude. For the first time, she admitted out loud what she had been too afraid to say. "Ethan, I'm scared." He cupped her face, his voice steady. "Then let me be the one who isn't. You're not alone anymore." But even as Ethan vowed to protect her, Andrew's plan had already been set in motion. One final ruthless move that would force Emma into the fight of her life. The weeks after the threats were some of the hardest of Emma's life. Fear lurked at every corner, but alongside it grew something stronger: resolve. With Ethan by her side, she stopped hiding. Security was tightened around her townhouse, cameras installed, lawyers ready to strike if Andrew made a move. Instead of retreating, Emma pushed forward, determined to protect not just herself, but the life inside her. Late one night, as she sat in the nursery she had prepared, Emma placed her hands on the crib's smooth wooden rail. The soft pastel blankets were folded neatly, the rocking chair stood ready, and a small mobile twirled above the crib. Tears welled in her eyes, not of despair this time, but of bittersweet joy. She whispered, "You'll be born into love, into dignity, into a world where your mother stood up for herself." When the contractions began days later, Emma gripped Ethan's hand, her body racked with pain but her spirit unbroken. Hours of labor blurred into a haze of sweat and tears, but she never let go of him. Through every cry, Ethan was there, steady and unflinching, whispering encouragements. "You can do this. You're stronger than you think. Just one more push." And then the room filled with the cry of new life, a tiny wail that pierced through every shadow of her past. Emma collapsed against the hospital bed, sobbing with relief as the nurse placed her baby in her arms. A daughter. Perfect, fragile, and fierce all at once. Emma kissed the baby's forehead, whispering through her tears, "You are my everything. You are the reason I survived." The warmth of her child against her chest was the purest healing she had ever known. In that moment, every insult Andrew had hurled, every humiliation she had endured, faded into irrelevance. She had created something beautiful out of the wreckage. Ethan stood nearby, his eyes glistening as he watched Emma cradle her daughter. When she looked up at him, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, trust, perhaps even the spark of something deeper. For the first time, Emma allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by pain, but by hope. In the days that followed, the townhouse filled with laughter and light. Emma would rock her daughter to sleep while Ethan read reports beside her. Their companionship easy and natural. Each day was another step toward healing, another layer of strength built upon her past scars. But the world outside hadn't forgotten Andrew Carter. His empire was still crumbling, lawsuits multiplying, investors abandoning him like rats fleeing a sinking ship. And while Emma focused on her daughter, the whispers of his downfall grew louder. One evening, as Emma tucked her baby into the crib, Ethan entered the room, his expression serious. He handed her a folder. "You need to see this," he said. Emma glanced at the documents, her eyes widening as she read the headlines. More evidence, more lies exposed. Andrew was on the brink of total ruin. She looked down at her sleeping daughter, then back at Ethan. "It's almost over, isn't it?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Almost, but there's one last card to play, and it's yours to decide." Emma kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, "Then let's end this, for her, for me, for all of it." Because tomorrow she would face Andrew one final time. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters once again, but this time the atmosphere was different. It wasn't Emma Carter walking in with her head bowed, afraid of whispers. It was Emma Vanderbilt Carter, the heiress, the mother, the woman who had turned humiliation into triumph. Cameras flashed as she arrived, Ethan by her side, her daughter safely cared for at home. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Investors, journalists, and curious onlookers filled every seat, eager to witness what was being called the trial of the year. At the center of it all sat Andrew Carter. His once proud figure now gaunt, his suit ill-fitting, his eyes bloodshot. He looked nothing like the man who had once strutted through the city with arrogance dripping from every word. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Evidence was laid out in brutal detail. Fraudulent deals, embezzled funds, shell companies propping up his empire. Witnesses testified, including former employees who spoke of intimidation and lies. Piece by piece, Andrew's carefully crafted facade crumbled in front of everyone. Emma sat quietly, her expression composed. She didn't need to gloat. She didn't need to shout. Her silence was the loudest statement of all. That she had survived, that she had risen, and that Andrew's cruelty could no longer touch her. When the judge finally delivered the verdict, the room held its breath. Andrew Carter was found guilty of fraud, stripped of his assets, and ordered to repay millions in damages. His companies were dissolved, his influence gone, his reputation in ruins. He would leave the courtroom not as a king, but as a cautionary tale. The reporters surged forward, their questions sharp. "Emma, how does it feel to see justice served?" one asked. Emma paused on the courthouse steps, the flash of cameras lighting her serene face. She rested a hand over her heart, then over her belly, where her child once grew. "It feels like freedom," she said simply. "Not just for me, but for my daughter." This is proof that silence does not mean weakness. Sometimes silence is strength, and sometimes silence is the storm that destroys everything built on lies. The crowd erupted in applause. Headlines later that night would hail her as a symbol of resilience, a woman who turned betrayal into empowerment. Sasha Silent Moore trended worldwide, her name etched into conversations not just as Andrew's ex-wife, but as Emma Carter, the woman who rewrote her story. Meanwhile, Andrew left the courthouse in handcuffs, his head lowered, jeers from the crowd echoing in his ears. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. She had already disappeared, aligning herself with new circles, leaving him to face his ruin alone. Back at her townhouse, Emma cradled her daughter in her arms, pressing a kiss to the baby's forehead. Ethan stood nearby, watching with quiet admiration. The war was over, the past had been buried, and before her stretched a future bright with possibility. Emma whispered to her daughter, her voice soft but unshakable, "You will never know shame, you will only know love, and together we will build a life where no one decides our worth but us." Ethan stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Their eyes met, and for the first time, Emma allowed herself to smile without pain, to feel the warmth of hope for something new. And as the city outside buzzed with her victory, Emma Carter closed the chapter on betrayal forever. Reborn not as a victim, but as a woman who had turned silence into power and pain into triumph. So, that's how the story closes, my wonderful friends. You're still here with me right now, aren't you? If you've stayed until this moment, then something in Emma's journey must have touched your heart in a way words can't fully explain. And maybe, just maybe, it's because her struggle reminds us of our own. Life has a way of testing us. Betrayal, humiliation, loss, they can make us feel like we're nothing. But as the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Emma's silence wasn't weakness, It was the calm before her storm, the strength she carried until the right moment to rise. And isn't that what life demands of us too? To hold steady, to endure, to choose when to fight back with dignity? Her story teaches us that pain can be fuel, that endings can become beginnings, and that no one has the right to define our worth but us. If this touched you, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel, so together we can keep telling stories that heal, inspire, and remind us that we are never truly powerless.